Transhumanism and Spirituality. Let's dive right in. So, the definition of transhumanism is a philosophy that explores human transcendence above or beyond organic corporeal limitations through technological and philosophical evolution. Now, it's interesting that technological and philosophical are both part of the definition for transhumanism because we start to really see that if the brain can translate into technology, we have to have a philosophy as to what the brain is. We have to have a philosophy of who we are in the brain, or are we a consciousness inside of the brain, or are we just the imprint of the brain functioning as it does? Now, I added from the spiritual point of view that if seen from a spiritual point of view, this is still viable because matter and energy in this realm is limited. Now, in multiple spiritual systems, I would say all, but I don't know this for sure, though I've studied most. There are different dimensions that matter and energy exist in different ways. That they aren't the same as they are in the material realm. Especially in Hinduism, where it talks about the differences of time and space and matter and energy, and more material, more basic matter and energy existing in this realm, in this universe, if you will, even though the universe is around this one, in this part of the multiverse, in this dimension. I'm mixing a lot of terms here, but where we are in our materiality, matter and energy are not highly developed, are very basic, and they aren't at their heightened forms like they are in higher dimensions, in higher realms, in universes far beyond our cluster of universes that are kind of in between I would say the descension of material and energy and the further ascension of it. We're kind of in between in this realm. Now, let me start off by reading from Swami Prabhupada's book, Easy Journey to Other Planets. Now, this book talks about the anti-material particle in one section of it, and the proper name for Swami Prabhupada is A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, His Divine Grace. And let me give you a clear picture of that again. Now, he talks about anti-material not really being anti-material. For anti-material to be anti-material, it has to have different qualities. As far as material and anti-material being able to destroy each other, similar quantities destroy each other. And anti-material and material, they both decay. They're both affected by the progression of time. They both have the same weaknesses, even though they are polar opposites. In order for anti-material to be true anti-material, it has to have completely different qualities than material, and not just be dialectical opposite. So he describes the anti-material particle on page 4 of, once again, Easy Journey to Other Planets. This anti-material particle is within the material body. Because of the presence of this anti-material particle, the material body is progressively changing from childhood to boyhood, from boyhood to youth to old age, after which the anti-material particle leaves the old, unworkable body and takes up another material body. This description of a living body confirms the scientific discovery that energy exists in two forms. When one of them, the antimaterial particle, is separated from the material body, the latter becomes useless for all purposes. As such, the antimaterial particle is undoubtedly superior to the material energy. And I'll continue a little bit more. No one, therefore, should lament for the loss of material energy. All varieties of sense perception in the categories of heat and cold, happiness and distress, are but interactions of material energy which come and go like seasonal changes. The temporary appearance and disappearance of such material interactions confirms that the material body is formed of a material energy inferior to the living force or jiva mukta energy. Now, what he's talking about is that he considers anti-material, as we understand it, and material both kind of a materialistic energy. But when we get into, the true anti-material particle, what he's getting at is that it's the soul, and that the anti-material particle and the soul are one, they're the same thing. Once we start getting into that, then we start to realize that matter and energy exist in a completely different quantifiable state when it comes to the anti-material particle, which is the soul. The reason we age, he goes into greater detail, is because the antimaterial particle is trying to get out of its material energetic casing that it is in this realm. It wants to move on, and that's why we age. It tries to its energetic effect on our bodies is basically a decaying effect, because it is something that is eternal and cannot be destroyed, and it is encased in that which is temporary and is transitory. Whereas the antimaterial particle, it has its same form and tries to break its encasing, basically. So, without going too much further into that, let's jump to the Apocalyptic Agenda, Paradoxes in Transhumanist Thought by Sean Hartlieb. Now, this book is something that I got today, but I'd like to read, a section from the preface, if I might. And, all of this is going to slowly start to connect, and I will make the connections, of course. Some people still think I'm crazy, but for anybody who cares, I'll make the connections. Now, there is no guarantee artificially rendered augmentations or the virtual realms transhumanists place their complete and total faith in shall lead to such grandiose visions for some transcendent enlightenment as to what reality is upon gaining more knowledge of human existence. After uploading their minds to a digital matrix, this techno-progressivism that might serve man from the ailing of a limiting materiality these transhumanists so staunchly desire. Faith is a definitive condition in its permanency of human experience, whereas technology is always absolute in its alienation from this spiritually freeing experience. So what is most vital to observe is both are associative in their purpose and practice. They both produce the same effects in destroying the flesh in favor of spirit. Thus, they are simultaneously products of human consciousness governing his self-creation. Now, however, faith provides an actual means to internalizing natural grace through separating oneself from materialism of the self when having the moment of revelation, to seeing the bare and fundamental condition of his temporality on the earth. From submitting his presence to the heavens in contrast to technological transhumanism that seeks after the immortal boundlessness of consciousness, once merging with those same cosmological conditions. They are equally absolute realities in their probability of outcome, and also with gratifying men for aiding his acceptance of conditional pain and suffering due to mortality. However, upon assessing what they provide to men, only the former of religious faith provides any genuine authenticity for man's experience, in that he is actually alive and extant. Since the secular alternative provides a mere reassurance for the conscious intellect, but one that has no true substance, it is prone to disestablishment with man's constant primal need to destroying that which already constitutes himself. So, as I'm reading this, I read a little bit more than I'd actually read before and trying to understand it at once. This is, of course, in the preface of the Apocalyptic Agenda by Sean B. Hartlieb. And that's not by... The preface is a little bit different than the actual book. But, what it is getting at is that, my interpretation of it is that transhumanism is the idea that we can actually transcend even the casing that our brains contain us within, our consciousness within. That our consciousness can expand once its human casing, that is the brain, let alone the body, confines it within. If there is something within ourselves that we can transfer to something that can compute more, can have a grander intellect, that can experience other people more readily just by downloading to a certain matrix. Maybe it's by choice, maybe it's by not. There's different theories about why one is better than the other. But regardless, that enlightenment for everyone, downloading into this matrix and existing as a being who can compute more, who can understand more, who can have ready access to information, that will allow our evolution, not confined by our corporeal form, not confined by our bodies, but becoming beings that are still conscious, that still maintain consciousness, but have it in a form that exceeds anything that our bodies will become in the immediate future. Basically, goose-stepping evolution, or rather speeding up our evolution to the extent that we actually become more evolved to such a quickening and greater degree that Darwinism or evolution in the physical sense is petty, is to be thrown aside, because with technology we can expand our horizons in ways that we could never imagine as we are now in this corporeal body with this corporeal sense of evolution and evolutionary cycle that takes so long. Now, with Swami Prabhupada's ideas about the antimaterial particle and my ideas about transferring basically the whole brain into another body, let's take all this and try to diagnose, what the combination of spirituality and transhumanism could possibly be, like I alluded to at the beginning of this video. Now, the whole nervous system, I think, is kind of a housing, but also a transference system for the antimaterial particle to engage the different parts of the material body. So we aren't able to truly sense the antimaterial particle yet, and how it basically influences the physical body, how it transfers consciousness, how it fuels consciousness. So to just put our brain into another, let's say a robot body or an android body, that wouldn't be enough. Right now, we do not scientifically quantify the antimaterial particle in a way that would allow us to develop technology to transfer that to another body. And just transferring the brain, I think, would actually, the brain might still be active, we might still be thinking, but just having the brain transferred, I think, would make a shell of a person. And it might even remove the ghost in that shell. It's a little bit of a reference. But what we're trying to transfer is that ghost, that consciousness, that which is us beyond the material reality of our bodies and our brains and everything else that is very corporeal and limited. That's what we're trying to transfer. And without truly understanding the antimaterial particle, or how our nervous system engages in our body, and how it basically judges experience more than just our senses go, but how we interpret that experience and filter it through our brain and into our consciousness. Once we start to understand these things, then it becomes more likely that we'll be able to transfer the antimaterial particle. But until then, I think that if we just transferred our brains, or even just our nervous systems, and without understanding consciousness itself at a more primal level, like sages and yogis have understood, though they don't suggest technology or try to invent technology that would allow us to do this for fairly obvious reasons for a lot of yogis and sages, because the true work, the hardest work, is dealing with the human body. This shortcut to enlightenment, to experience of other people's consciousness, and experiencing the universe with all the resources available to any conscious being, it's a shortcut. And to take that shortcut might take away something from every single individual consciousness. It might take away the significance of every single individual consciousness. But that's another concern that we should take into account. Now, the danger is that we will become shells without that ghost, without that consciousness. But I also think that there is a chance that one day we will understand that antimaterial particle and how to transfer it, so that we can take any form, technologically, before we even reach enlightenment or moksha. And I do believe in God and the gods, being very, very certain functions of reality, being different domains within reality, crisscrossing their influences in order to create the fabric that we know and love as in the space and time we know, and the universes that surround. But I also think that one day we'll understand the gods and the soul, and in different terms, more scientific terms, along with spiritual terms, we'll be like, okay, this is what spirituality was talking about, and because we found it out with this scientific equivalent, assuming that we haven't reached a higher state of consciousness with our physical bodies by then. But I think that will be like, okay, this is the vocabulary, this is the scientific vocabulary and the spiritual vocabulary. They're actually talking about the same thing, just different languages. I think we'll reach that point. However, we're not there yet. We're not to that point to where we can easily say what technology can do for us in our consciousness. And I still think that, of course, the spiritual path is highly preferable. I believe in moksha, the liberation of oneself from the cycle of birth and death and reincarnation. And I believe that the soul exists, and I believe that the gods exist. Like I said, they're functions of reality. And once we truly try to understand what the antimaterial particle is, we'll make spiritual revelations that will actually bring a heightened state of spiritual awareness to where the technology might not even be necessary. But before I go too much longer on this rant, it has been a rant, this has been a video about transhumanism and spirituality. And I hope some of these ideas have been interesting to you. And I think that right now, transhumanism isn't at a stage to where we can even begin thinking that we can transfer who we are, our consciousness, into something else. Because I think that ultimately, maybe we can even create technology that can receive that antimaterial particle, and we can maybe even have a hand in controlling reincarnation millions of years from now, if that's even allowed by the overconsciousness. But anyway, I'm getting too far into all this. But what is consciousness to you? This whole conversation is about consciousness and how the soul itself is the seed of consciousness, and consciousness is kind of emitted from it, and then it learns through the different forms that it takes up as it tries to cast them off. And truly embracing that antimaterial particle and being able to cast off your own body willingly, with your whole body, with your ego, with your personality intact, that means that you become that particle in essence. So I want to know your thoughts about consciousness. If you think any of this makes sense. If you don't, that's fine. Just let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And feel free to hit that like button down there if you thought any of this was, worth watching. It helps out the channel. So thank you very much, and hope all of y'all have a great day. And think about yourself, brothers and sisters. Think about yourself.